Another thing that's frequently looked at when analysing data is how spread out the actual data is. Now, there's several different measures of spreads that you can calculate. In this video, we're going to focus on two of those, which is known as the range and the interquartile range. So we're really looking at how spread out is our actual data. So first of all, the range. The range is the difference between the maximum value and the minimum value of your data set. So it's really looking at just two individual points and looking at how far spread out are those 2 points of your data set. To calculate the range, it's going to be the maximum subtract the minimum. Okay, so an example of this, we've got the following data set in front of us. To calculate the range here, we only need 2 of these data points. What the maximum is, the maximum here is 8. So here's our max. And what the minimum is, which is over here, which is 2. So if we want to know what the range is, it's going to be equal to the maximum subtract the minimum, which is going to be equal to 8 subtract 2. So therefore, our range here is equal to 6. And what that says to us is the data is spread out by 6 points, whatever the units are, by 6 units. Okay, so 6 here, if you look at 2 to get to 8 is going to be 6. All right, that's all the range is telling us. Okay, so from this you go, okay, well, that's one thing, but it doesn't tell us anything about where the middle of the data actually is. And obviously, if you've got one massive outlier, so let's say instead of this being 8, it was 64, it might give a vastly wrong impression about how spread out your data is, okay? So if you think about it, if you're only taking the maximum and the minimum, and this was your data set, and you just had 64 at the end here, your range is suddenly going to be like 62. And that might tell you, if you're only looking at the range, that you've got some really spread out data. However, most of the data was actually between 2 and 8. Okay, so that's something to be very careful of when you're dealing with range. So we go, okay, well, how can we improve this a little bit? And one way to look at that is to actually look at the interquartile range. So rather than only looking at the difference between 0 to 100% of your data, basically what we do is we say, well, we get our data and we'll divide it into quarters. Okay, we'll look at having a quarter of our data here, a quarter of our data here, a quarter of our data here, and a quarter of our data here. Okay, now we've actually sort of done this a little bit when we're looking at measures of center, when we're calculating the median. Except instead of dividing into quarters, the median divided into halves. Okay, the median is actually what we call the Q2 value. Okay, it's where the halfway point of the data actually is. So interquartile range, what that actually looks at, instead of looking at the difference from 0 to 100%, interquartile range looks at the difference between 25% and 75%, also known as, the Q1, which is our 25% quartile, and Q3, which is our 75% quartile. All right, and it's the same sort of formula. It's like looking what's the difference between these two value points. So it's going to be our Q3 quartile, subtract away our Q1 quartile. Now to do this, there's a bit of a process that you have to follow. The first thing you actually have to do is find this median. You actually have to find where that 50% value is. Now, if you think back to it, finding median, there's a couple of ways that we can go about it. Have a look back in the video previously if you want to have a full review of that. But essentially what we've got to look at here is we've got 9 data points in total by the looks. So if we add 1 to that, that's going to be 10. Divide by 2, that's going to be 5. We're looking for the 5th data value. So the 5th data value here is going to be that 5 here. So this here is our median, okay, which I'm just going to call Q2 for the moment. Once we've got our median, what we then actually need to do is look at the remaining data that we've got, okay, and we're going to start on the left-hand side, the remaining data over here, and go, where's the middle of that? So the middle of that, we can sort of just visually see, because there's 4 data points, it's going to be between the 2nd and the 3rd data point here, okay, and the middle of this is our Q1. Now you got to remember, we're finding the median of these. So essentially you find the median of what's left down in here. So to find the median, because it's in between two data points, I actually have to add these data points together and divide by 2. So 3 plus 3 is going to be 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So our Q1 is going to be equal to 3 here. We do the same on the other side. We find the middlemost value of the remaining data on the upper half. All right. So what we've got here is it's between 6 and 7. So we add these together, which gives us 13. We divide by 2, which is 6.5. So our Q3 is going to be equal to 6.5. All right. So now we can calculate the interquartile range. So the interquartile range, which we often call IQR, rather than writing it all out, is going to be equal to Q3 subtract Q1. And we've worked out that Q3 here is 6.5. Q1 here is 3. So our interquartile range here is going to be 3.5. And units, obviously, because we don't know what this data is actually representing. So essentially what the benefits of the interquartile range is over the range is, instead of just looking at the difference between 0 and 100%, this isn't affected as badly by having a massive outlier in the end. All right. And it shows you where the middle 50% of the data is sort of lying. Okay. So 50% of the data is only 3.5%, like the middle 50% is only 3.5 units apart in its sort of spread. So let's just go through one more example of the interquartile range, and we'll just talk about the step by step. Step 1 is find the median, okay, which is the middlemost value. Now we have 10 data points here, so the median is going to be between the 5th and the 6th data point. Like I say, if you don't know how to quickly do that, go back onto my video about median. All right. So now once we've got that, what we want to do is find the median of, I'll just quickly indicate that that's my Q2. We want to find the median of the lower half, which will give us our lower quartile, which is Q1. Okay, so the median of this, the middlemost value is that 2. So it's right on this value now. So our lower quartile is 2. So now let's look for our upper quartile, which is going to be the median of the data that's remaining over here. So the middlemost value point of the remaining data is the 7. So this is our upper quartile, which is known as Q3. Okay, so now we've got the lower and upper quartiles. We can calculate the interquartile range, which is Q3 minus Q1, or the upper quartile subtract the lower quartile, which here is going to be 7 subtract 2. So therefore our interquartile range is going to be equal to 5. So something we can automatically do here when we're looking at these two data sets is we can see that the middle 50% of the data in the bottom was actually more spread out than the middle 50% of the data up the top here. Okay, and depending on the context, that might have some, reasonable things that you can draw out of that data.